So if you haven't been following my channel recently, or if you're new to my channel, recently I took my Dutch girlfriend on a road trip across the US. We started in Dallas, went to New Orleans. From New Orleans we went to New York and then Boston. From Boston we went to Chicago. Chicago we went to LA, and from LA we came back to Dallas. And throughout that trip, we saw many trucks. Many trucks, hundreds if not thousands of semi-trucks. And throughout the series, I joked many times that I should get a CDL for the amount of driving that I did during that trip. And honestly, I should, because I did a lot of driving. I literally drove the distance from Lisbon to Moscow and back. And I know I keep saying that, and I'm going to keep saying it because that's a long distance. But as we saw these trucks, I did notice that the trucks here look a lot different than the trucks in Europe. The biggest difference visually is you can see the trucks here have this long nose, whereas the European trucks have the flat nose, the flat front. Now, I'm not really sure what the differences are in terms of the overall specs between them, but that's why we are here. I've always wondered why the trucks are so different, and this person is claiming that American trucks are worse than European trucks. And I'm assuming he is going to explain why as well. That said, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this video.
What would happen if a flat-nosed European truck and a long-nosed American truck got into a head-on collision? Well, the truth is that both would likely be crushed by their trailers, but that aside, the American truck driver would likely fare better due to the extra crumple zone, which is why fatal accidents involving heavy trucks are 6 to 8 times higher in America than they are in Europe. Wait, how does that work? The truth is that while American trucks are probably safer for the driver, by most metrics, European big rigs are more advanced, a claim backed up by many big rig drivers that have tested both, who themselves often claim that European trucks are 15 years ahead of anything in America.
I'm not gonna lie, I've never actually sat inside of an 18-wheeler before. That interior looks a lot better than I would have expected. I don't know if this is an American or European interior, but those seats look really comfortable. I am not going to lie. There was a point in time when I actually legitimately considered becoming a truck driver. And hey, if this YouTube thing doesn't work out, that's still an idea that I would consider because I do like to drive. But I guess now it's about figuring out if I would rather do it in America or Europe.
Technology that we absolutely love to integrate. We've also seen some technology that we weren't such a fan of. A lot of regulations in Europe. But overall, these guys, they are 10-15 years ahead of us in many ways.
Today I'm going to explain why that is, not just what makes them better. Hello people of the internet, I'm Nico, a guy who wants to get every single license that's available today, from pilot's license, helicopter, to commercial driving license. And in this video I want to explain why European semi-trucks are better than American semi-trucks. Semi-trucks in Europe are different for many reasons, but predictably, it is mostly because of regulations on truck size. Thanks to Europe mostly maintaining its historical buildings and infrastructure, along with a much higher population density than the United States, roads have remained much narrower with more sharp turns than America's roads.
I've always thought that truck drivers in Europe probably need to be a lot more skilled. I don't know if it's more difficult to obtain a CDL in Europe than it is in the US. I know to get a regular driver's license it is, so I have to imagine that it's harder to get a CDL as well. But just imagine trying to navigate that big ass 18-wheeler, even with the flat nose, just a big 18-wheeler with the trailer behind it on this road right here. I would be beyond stressed. Beyond stressed. So I imagine that has something to do with the lower fatality rate or fatal crash rate of European truck drivers compared to American truck drivers.
This challenging environment spawned a number of innovations, including rear wheel steering. Not steering for the rear wheels of the truck, no, steering for the wheels of the trailers. Now, despite America's wide roads, because so many cities are comprised of grids, the sheer number of sharp 90-degree turns should already justify rear-wheel steering for trucks in America, but I have yet to see it. There are a host of other smaller innovations.
It's crazy. I didn't know that was a thing. I literally never knew that was a thing.
Legs that automatically retract, reversing lights built into the trailer, a plug for all of the electrical lines and air lines that auto-connects when you hitch a trailer, height adjustable suspension to more quickly match the height of the trailer to the truck, airbags on all four corners of the cab, all of which make for an easier and more comfortable operator experience, which is actually not a difference between American and European trucks. Both sides of the pond put a great emphasis on this, but approach this in drastically different ways, which I will get to later. The most notable difference between American and European trucks is of course the nose, or rather the lack thereof. Because of the aforementioned smaller roads, European nations opted to introduce an overall length limit for truck and trailer of about 62 feet. America used to have a similar regulation, which is why flat-nosed trucks were the standard semi-truck back in the 70s, but that regulation has since been lifted.
I honestly didn't even know that America ever had flat-nosed trucks. I never saw a flat-nosed truck until I went to Europe for the first time. So that's a pretty interesting piece of trivia.
Opening the floodgates for monstrosities such as this. While the European mind cannot even conceive of the monstrosities such as this.
What is this? That can't be real. That literally cannot be real. I guess there's a trailer in the back, so it probably has a full bathroom and shower and things of that nature. But honestly, there are so many truck stops here that have showers, or gyms that have showers. I know this because this is how we were able to shower and just do our basic hygienic things, that I don't see why this would be necessary as a truck driver. This is kind of crazy.
This. While the European mind cannot even conceive of the idea that this is road legal or even good for trucking, the reason this exists is because of the key difference between trucking in America versus Europe. The trucking industries on each side of the pond are quite similar with the types of employment, but differ drastically in the share of self-employed versus company-employed drivers. This is generalized, but trucking in Europe is really only a day job where you drive for a company from point A to point B and back again. While there are trucking companies that may send a driver from point A to point B to point C and so on, there are more regular runs that are simply repeated to keep a supply of goods moving. And while America has a large number of these commercial drivers, there is a huge proportion of drivers that are owner-operated. So rather than having a regular delivery run, the owner-operated trucks often work individual jobs, delivering goods from one city to another, then picking up another load and driving to the next city, where another load is then delivered to the next city, often culminating in weeks or even months on the road. It's because of this different type of—
Wait. Not to cut you off there, bro, but I always thought that that was just a truck driver life. I thought that truck drivers are always kind of on the road and maybe come home every few weeks or so. But I guess is not the case in Europe. I don't know. That's kind of what he seems like he's saying there, is that European truck drivers, they're not just on the road for weeks or months on end, whereas American truck drivers are. So maybe it's possible that European trucks don't have the bed in the back, because I know that American trucks generally will have a bed behind the driving area. But
type of employment in the industry that causes trucks in America to be so large. The amount of space in the cab is vital, as this is their home for extended periods of time. Plus,
yeah, this is what I was talking about. And this one right here looks like it's fully decked out. A TV, you have a microwave. So yeah, I guess European trucks just don't have this. Interesting.
The extended wheelbase provides some additional ride comfort for those long highway miles. Driver comfort is absolutely critical for truckers in America, which makes it all the more confusing as to why American semi-trucks often lack a lot of the standard comfort features that European trucks have. That naturally begs the question, if American semi-trucks lack a lot of these comfort features, how do American semi-truck companies make the job as comfortable as possible for the truckers that make this country work? The answer is outside. This view will be familiar to most Americans: sprawling neighborhoods, massive parking lots in front of big box stores, and unnecessarily wide arterial roads clogged full of cars due to the lack of alternative transportation options.
Yep.
While auto industry lobbying efforts also played a great role in the formation of this wasteland, the trucking industry helped contribute to the scale of this environment as well as the degradation of it. Over the years, semi-truck manufacturers, trucking companies, and other special interest groups have spent millions lobbying politicians to address their concerns about policies on the table.
Now we're getting into the real stuff. This is something that I never thought of. I never considered this. So the trucking companies, the trucking industry as a whole, is lobbying politicians to keep the current urban planning structure, the urban planning practices that we see in America today. That's interesting.
This can range across a wide variety of topics, from safety standards that would better protect pedestrians and cyclists, to environmental regulations, but a key issue that the trucking industry has been pushing for decades is car-centric infrastructure. This goes as far back as the 1930s, when semi-truck maker Mack Trucks got involved in a ploy to buy up streetcar lines and remove the tracks to make room for cars, trucks, and buses, for which—
Okay, so I had heard of this before, but I didn't know that the trucking company was involved in it. I can see right here, Phillips Petroleum Company, Standard Oil Company of California. I knew that the oil companies were heavily involved in this, but I never considered the possibility that the trucking companies were involved in this. Now I'm having a moral dilemma. Now I don't know if I'd want to be a truck driver, because if they're doing that, then I mean, they're directly contributing to the degradation of the United States. I mean, the urban planning is a big part of the reason why America feels inferior to Europe. At least in my experience, is that the car-centric, car-dependent rather, urban planning makes for an unsustainable model of growth and maintenance even. So you see a lot of America having dilapidated infrastructure simply because these places can't afford to sustain themselves. And the trucking companies are a big part of this. That's crazy. It's crazy because, I mean, of course there are a lot of trucks within the more populated areas, but most of the trucks that you'll see if you take a road trip are actually in the middle of nowhere. So I don't know why they would be so adamant about sustaining the current model when we know it doesn't work.
For which Mack Trucks,
Oh wait, money, that's why.
along with General Motors and a few other recognizable names, got sued in 1953. Naturally, this was not the last lobbying effort from the trucking industry. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the trucking industry pushed back against railway companies' lobbying efforts to minimize competition from the trucking industry. But as the years wore on, the truckers' efforts proved beneficial. In 1974, the Truck Operators Nonpartisan Committee made campaign contributions to 117 congressional candidates in—
Wait, hold on. This is a little bit late, but I guess I didn't really consider the fact that trains would be direct competitors to trucks, to these 18-wheelers. So that's interesting. That's really interesting. So they don't want train tracks because train tracks equal competition. I always thought that they sort of collaborated. So something would come from the train and then it would go on the truck and then the truck would take it somewhere. Maybe then it would either be distributed to wherever it needs to be distributed to, or it would get on another train, so on and so forth. I always thought they worked together, but I guess not.
In both Democratic and Republican parties, and 6 weeks later, the House of Representatives reversed an earlier vote and allowed increased weight limits on interstate highways. 8 years later, the trucking industry got another win, with the Reagan administration agreeing to increase weight limits further and overrule state limits on length and width. This of course led to roads being made wider, curbs getting pushed back at intersections to make turning easier, all of which naturally came at the cost of pedestrians and cyclist safety, and the quality of life for everyone who can, but especially those who cannot drive a car. These weight limit increases also caused the roads to degrade more quickly, in extreme cases even causing these dips in the asphalt.
What you see right there, you see a lot of that in America. Again, I drove across this country twice. We saw a very good portion of this country. Literally every state that we went to, the majority of the roads look like this right here. And honestly, this one isn't even particularly bad because at least you can still see the lines, but there is a lot of wear and tear on these roads. And I always thought that it was more so the cars and just the sheer volume of cars, especially cars like this and this, the two trucks that you see here. I always thought that those were the biggest culprits, but now I'm starting to realize that I might have been wrong.
It should be noted, though, that the lobbying efforts from the trucking industry are at least in some way justified. I've seen some of the narrow turns and insane maneuvers that European truckers have to pull off to deliver goods, and the lobbying efforts here do their job to make life for truckers
crazy.
easier.
Wait, hold on. We need to see that again. That's crazy. See, this is what I mean by European truck drivers are probably a lot more skilled than American truck drivers, because this right here, I'm not gonna lie, I probably would have quit. I would have gotten out of the truck and just walked away. No 2 weeks notice, no nothing.
And the lobbying efforts here do their job to make life for truckers easier. However, is it really necessary to alter the entire layout of a city and compromise everyone else's safety in order to make trucking a little bit easier? Especially when Europe has showed us that there are solutions that don't compromise the quality of life for a single industry's benefits. I leave that up to you to decide, but I don't see why I should live in this environment when the trucking industry could just add Europe's innovations to their own trucks, which would make the lives of truckers easier while not compromising everyone else's quality of life.
So, in short, in summary, instead of making cities bigger to accommodate the big trucks, trucking companies should make the trucks smaller in order to accommodate the smaller cities, the more dense urban development. And also, I have to imagine, and again, I'm no expert on this by any means, never even been inside of an 18-wheeler, but I have to imagine that maybe they could be a little more efficient in how they plan their routes. Because obviously, trucks are going to avoid certain areas like, let's say, for example, Manhattan, New York City. You're not going to want to drive an 18-wheeler through those streets. So maybe they can come up with a more efficient distribution system where they take the materials that they're delivering to the edge of town, and then from there they're delivered by train tracks to the final destinations. I don't know, I'm just spitballing ideas, but we know that there is a more optimal solution out there. Now it's all about actually seeing that more optimal solution into fruition.